is Rebecca. She's 23. She saw an Oriental show and then decided she would go to Mecca across the sea. She sailed away one day to Turkey far away, and she lived near the Sultan's den. She stayed about 2 years, got full of new ideas, and now she's back home again. Since Rebecca came back from Mecca, all day long she keeps on smoking Turkish tobacco. With a veil upon her face, she goes dancing round the place. And yesterday our father found her with a Turkish towel around her. Oi, oi, everyone's worried so. They think she's crazy in the dome. She's as bold as Peter Bear, Peter's bear, but Becky's better. Since Rebecca came back home. In Mecca, where the nights are hot, Rebecca got an awful lot of loining. She certainly did. She goes to sleep and shadows creep and has to keep a bowl of incense boiling. Some classy kids. Her mother feels so sad. Her brother Mo is mad and he keeps on complaining so. To satisfy her whim, she keeps on calling him Mohammed instead of Mo. Since Rebecca came back from Mecca, all day long she keeps on smoking Turkish tobacco. She lays on a Turkish rug. Everyone says she is a bug. And since she came back from the harem, she's got clothes but she don't wear them. Oi, oi, everyone's worried so. She made the Sultan lose his throne. Once her little sister Sonia wore her clothes and got pneumonia. Since Rebecca came back home.
Hello. Everyone can see and hear me. Gosh. Everyone? I guess I am. Okay. Sì, benissimo. Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the staff of the Pordenone Salon Film Festival, Giornate del Cinema Muto, on behalf of the Board of Directors, welcome to our first ever live edition quite emotional for me, and I think for probably many of you as well. Used to being in Pordenone at this time, but also that sense of being together. Also to hear the extraordinary music of José María Serralde Ruiz. Just a few things to talk about before we get into the conversation that we're going to be doing. First of all, if you had any technical questions, any technical problems, I hope you saw that there was a live chat that you could go to in order to hopefully solve any issues that you might have had at the beginning. Also, to maximize your viewing experience, for those of you perhaps who have smart TVs, it's of course wonderful to be able to see it on a big screen. But even if you don't, and you have a USB portal in your television, it's very easy to buy a cable that will connect your computer to your television, and that way you can see it on a much bigger screen. Also, hopefully you saw that everything is indeed subtitled in both English and Italian on the little CC at the bottom right of the screen. That's all there. And as we said at the beginning, everything is available for 24 hours. So watch it again, invite your friends, all of that sort of thing will be great. Also, just at the beginning now, I want to thank so much the people that are the technical staff that's made all of this possible, from Marco Villotto, who's directing all of these extras, all of putting everything together, to the extraordinary staff at the Cineteca del Friuli, Andrea Tessitore, Carlo Montanaro, Elena Baltrami. Without this team, none of this would have been possible, and none of this would have gone as smoothly as it is now and will continue to go. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to this conversation two special guests who will be talking with me about the films that we've just seen. The first is Jennifer Peterson. Jennifer is a professor and chair of the Department of Communication at Woodbury University in Los Angeles, and her work and interests are concentrated on cinema and the environmental humanities. And she's the author of this extraordinary, exceptional book, Education in the School of Dreams, Travelogues and Early Nonfiction Film, which, if you don't have it, really is a must. So Jennifer, and here you are. Hello, Jennifer. Thanks for joining us. And José María Serralde Ruiz from Mexico City, the wonderful musician who accompanied the films this afternoon. One of our regular musicians. We're so delighted to have you and so proud to have you. So thank you for joining.
Thanks so much. This is really exciting.
So actually, I'm going to start with you, José María, if I may. What were the impressions that you got when you first began watching the films?
Well, first of all, what I realized, first of all, I was really flattered to work, with this set of films. Especially, I found, first of all, that it was like a kind of extremely diverse photograph to what travelogues, scenic films, vistas like in Latin America, or views could be. I mean, this was a huge snapshot of many. I mean, it was a long time span, 1911 to 1939. That was my first impression, that will be a really complex thing to do, to play for or score for. And the diversity was not only about places, experiences, senses, but it was also about readings, because there was a foreign film coming to the place and setting up and registering and filming the place. So that made up like tons of let's say, noise in my mind. But in the very beginning, I was kind of scared. So that was my second feeling. I was definitely scared about this. But the most beautiful part of our processes, musical processes with silent films, is that it's a very exciting moment when you have to begin scoring and dropping your musical ideas, and then developing improvisation through composition and every possible resource, the whole score. So basically, my third idea was, what will be the order of these films? that that's something, I don't know if some colleagues, I'm sure they do, the thing about writing music, thinking about the screening itself. So building up a climatic moment, you know, it's also possible in a set of travelogues or scenic films, basically because you can enjoy that moment when you get to the very important moment, musical moment, almost at the end of the screening, and then you begin like heading downwards. So that was, you know, the most complex part of this process, and that's exactly the three stages I went through. So, yeah, and it was really compelling. So the point was that I tried to do my research, connect to the landscape, of course, but also to the culture. That's why I used like a huge amount of quotes of music, not only from national composers. I mean, for instance, like Chopin. Of course, I was using a whole piece. I dared to use a whole part of the Andante Spianato, Gran Polonesa. I mean, Chopin's masterpiece, and the Saint-Saëns Egyptian concert, the piano concert.
Yeah,
was like one of those quotes, and well, and it was contrasting because that complexity was pictured in a way, what I found, because for instance, I'm using gypsy cymbalom music for the Moldau screening. I mean, you know, the St. John's Rapids, and of course the big quote to Smetana's own reading of that same river. It was so exciting to be playing the music that was supposed to be done, inspired in that precise part of the Moldau. That's like such an experience. So basically, what I can say is that I've been doing travelogues, of course, before, many of them for many years. But this precise screening, probably because we are under lockdown and because we are so eager to travel, so eager to connect with otherness, to connect with other sensibilities, politically standing in front of those sensibilities, was the reason for which this program turned to be one of the most exciting experiences I've ever had recording for silent films. So playing for silent films, performing for silent films. So that's the reason for which I first said I was so flattered to be part of this project. So thanks so much, Giornate.
No, thank you enormously. Jennifer, I was wondering, when we spoke a few days ago, we talked about that tension between cinema of contemplation and cinema of sensation. And I wondered if we could talk a little bit about how music also changes our understanding of one or the other, and are they mutually exclusive?
Yeah. And first, I just wanted to start by thanking you, Jay, for inviting me to talk here, and also to say how much I enjoyed the music just now. I mean, there's something about travelogues and music that absolutely goes together. It's really part of the lyricism of the genre. It requires music to sort of bring it out. And I feel like the music that you just played for us, José María Serralde Ruiz, is fantastic. So I really appreciated that. I've been thinking a lot about virtual travel and how it's been changed by the world that we're living in right now. So maybe before I get to the question of music, I just wanted to mention the strange and kind of wonderful experience we have of watching virtual travel from 100 years ago on our digital screens like this. There's just something that's been made new, I think, with this experience. So, you know, the original reviewers of these films celebrated them as being more democratic, right? They made travel available to the original viewers who could not afford to travel. And if that was true then, it's even more true now, because we're under lockdown, we cannot travel. And we have not only the kind of virtual travel from the original experience, but this kind of new virtual digital travel enabled by this experience of a virtual film festival. So I think there's something really fantastic and interesting about that. And it has positives and negatives, of course. We're not all together in the theater with each other, so we miss out on the liveness of that group viewing experience, and we miss out on the liveness of the music as well. So that's a loss. But what's enhanced is this kind of new opening up of geographical points of entry that are no longer just the place on the screen and us in the theater, but now it's also the place on the screen and us in anywhere around the world, which is kind of marvelous and fantastic. The other added benefit is that we get to reduce our carbon footprint by not having to fly there. So that's one kind of fringe benefit of this weird situation that we're dealing with right now. And I think we do have to sort of explore these options moving forward, as it's urgent to continue to reduce our carbon footprint. So I think the experience of mobile perception opened up by travelogues is only even more interesting now with this kind of viewing format that we have.
Yeah, no, I think that absolutely true. I agree with that 100%. As you said, there are just all these levels that are that we're entering into as we're watching them, and what we talked about a little bit before, well, actually, I don't know that we did. I was inspired to do this both by the lockdown, but also by watching the Orphan Film Symposium several months ago, which had a great theme of water. And watching the films again now, I was struck without even realizing how much water I kind of put into the film, and that idea of gliding across surfaces and gliding across water that feeds our hunger for movement, for that kind of gentle movement to escape from where we are. There's something quite potent, I find, about all of that water-based imagery.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, actually, and a thing that we kind of talked about together the other day is the movement of these films. And this is, so many aspects of movement are involved with travelogues, not only the movement of the camera. There's that moment in the New York film in this program. It's about, I think, 15 minutes into the program we just watched when we get the first shot out the back of the moving trolley. And it's just so fabulous to feel the activation of that movement of the camera. But then, of course, everything that's filmed is moving, and the filmmakers chose images or subject matter that moved on purpose to enhance the sensation of the experience. So we have lots of water, lots of seashores, lots of bathing, people diving into the water. And so there's that kind of movement. And then there's, again, this second order of movement of the spectator, right? Our kind of perceptual experience of watching this. So, for example, in the film of Bruges, where we're kind of riding on the canals, it's so fabulous because not only in the distance we see the bridges with these kind of receding graphic shapes, but then we're moving into it, right? So there's this kind of telescopic push-pull experience. It's really about depth and movement there. It's just fantastic, really kinetic. And I think it's...
And there's a moment when you just... And there's a moment when you just want to, you actively feel like you should be brushing the branches as they're dangling away, which just gives me the shivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the thing we were talking about the other day is, is this contemplative or is it sensational, right? And I think it can be both at the same time. I don't want to impose a kind of Cartesian mind-body split. I think we embody our mind and our bodies simultaneously. So we feel the experience of moving, and we feel a kind of contemplative aspect of that as well, watching on our screens.
This is this is so fantastic. I mean, what you are both addressing is exactly a kind of decision like any musician should take in front of one specific film. So should I step into the movement or get into the contemplation? Because it's happening in parallel moments. I mean, if you were at that same moment in history, filming that, you'll be feeling that sensation of, all right, we're moving on the boat, we're moving on the trolley, but there are still like people laughing there around. For instance, in the Krakow film, which was quite. It's like there's a huge counterpoint in this program with Ruiz, precisely, because we were still moving, but we're used in a deep state of contemplation, and that's the kind of musical decision one should take. For instance, so I'm so amazed. As we always say, I mean, we're always doing our job because we're part of the audience. We are playing for the film and feeling exactly what you're feeling. So we're used to another one in the audience, but we have to take that decision and translate that into music. So it's so curious that this kind of decision taking is a decision, and every decision is like crucial for sharing and like stepping to. For instance, there's another moment at the New York film I was really worried about, and that's the final scene where we're watching this millionaire with his family and his car. There was a driver, and then there was some decision taking there as of, okay, what I'm watching, am I on the trolley just feeling like nice in New York, or am I telling a story about who am I watching, So and this is very, very interesting, because this is the kind of decision like silent film pianists should take in a regular basis.
As an aside, apropos of that scene of watching the car with the African-American chauffeur, the car apparently was registered under the wife's name, not on the husband's. And I do wonder, I don't know if anybody can make anybody in the audience might be able to say something about that. I don't know how frequently in 1911 it was the women who had the cars registered in their names rather than their husbands. She's not driving clearly, but maybe she could. I don't know. Just that's a little bit of an aside. But what you were saying, Jose Maria, particularly also with the Krakow film, I was remarking to myself while watching it, there was the idea of contemplation, which is beautifully done, just the idea of a kind of Sunday stroll in the park. And then suddenly when the children come, you livened it up. It was suddenly active. It was more bouncy. It was a wonderful transition from one to the other.
Oh, thank you, Jay. Thanks so much. Well, that's Chopin's to blame. I mean, I'm really, as I said, I dare to play Chopin like for this huge moment of the beautiful piece. And then, I mean, I'm now pretty sure that if I leave the talk, is just because the Chopin police just knocked into my door and will bring me to. It's basically because what I did there is I follow up with a piece, with Chopin's piece, but then I turn it into a two-step and foxtrot. So I'm daring too much there, but that's exactly what we were talking about, and that's something I got from Jennifer's book, in a sense. This is, this is one of those beautiful moments when one musician steps into the ideas of the researcher and the curator, and they just match. Oh, wow, great, So that's exactly what happened to me. That's what I'm so happy. And that's because there's this social class thing that has to be on top of your readings. I mean, when you're getting to these films. So, for instance, in the Krakow film, I mean, if we take just a political position there, what exactly is it happening? Should we be contemplative, or should we just tap into this sense of well-being that's everywhere because of the time of the film, basically, because it's plenty. So we have a park here in Mexico that's Chapultepec. So I mean, I was getting like the feeling from there. And basically, one of the most amazing things about these films was they were always connecting with history, with this set of films, especially with this curatorial line. So that's exactly one of the most compelling moments. another point with Jennifer's readings about travelogues was precisely the position. It was about class, but there's a lot of intersectional ideas that came to my mind. So I don't know if you can like comment around all these things, because that's something that really blew my mind, especially, for instance, I mean, politically speaking, when doing the Trieste film, which was a huge bomb. So I would really love to listen to your comments and ideas around this intersectional position when you're programming these films. First of all, I was feeling this kind of sense that it was, for instance, in the New York film, we were solely watching a very specific class thing there of wealthy people. That's why I dropped the I mean, the last notes of the short was this the preacher and the slave like protest song. That was just it was a wink. Don't tell anyone. It's anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, there's something so amazing about all of these films are fantastic, and I really appreciate the program, Jay, so I thank you so much for that. But we're also doing a sort of time travel when we watch these films, right? So watching, for example, the New York film, which is such a beautiful print as well, just gorgeous. I just zone in on certain people who jump out at me. You know, there's at one moment we see two boys holding hands walking across the screen, and then we see an African-American man wearing a suit kind of walking towards the camera, and then we see a lady who's really tall, especially for 1911. You know, she looks really tall. And then a man with a tin lunch pail walks by, and then that wealthy family in the car, all of whom look unhappy except they're you know, and every one of these is a little story, which is why I just love this genre so much, because I could just watch these films over and over again and kind of create these little stories in my mind about these people. So in the New York film, we see this kind of cross-class public sphere, you know, in these outdoor shots. In the Krakow film, we see more of what looks like a kind of upper middle class park. I don't know this park, but I'm imagining, you know, the neighborhood around it seems fairly well-to-do. And then there, you know, I'm just struck by all the children looking at the camera, always in these films. I love the people looking at the camera and the children rolling their hoops along. You know, it's just so fabulous. One thing, Jay, we were kind of talking about too, is in the Cairo film, which is this fabulous fashion film. There's so many things going on, not only in terms of this kind of colonial gaze of the European traveler going to Egypt and posing in front of the pyramids with these nameless people who are kind of helping her travel there. There's the color as well, the formal element, you know, this beautiful stencil coloring, which just adds to the sensation of the film and the kind of the joy of watching that film right now. So just one little detail I wanted to mention, I really noticed this time, is the way the young girl's dress changes color. We first see it and it's been colored yellow, and then we see it and it's been colored pink. So it's just fabulous, this kind of sensationalism of the applied color system.
I agree. And later on in the week, we're going to be doing a book presentation of a new book on color in the 1920s. So it'll be wonderful if we can maybe work that in to the conversation, because I noticed that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I noticed it as well. Why is Colette's dress changing color?
Yeah.
But apropos of color too, I was just really, even though I'd seen it before, I was so struck by that pale purple violet in the St. John's Rapids film, the Czech film, which it as the sun is setting, that it turns violet, is such a bold choice and yet such a beautiful one.
Yes.
Yes, we get an inner title that says Last Rays of Sunset, which sort of motivates it, but then the colors are just so, you know, beautiful and psychedelic even, right? The purple and pink sunset. It's great.
How, when you were doing research on the travelogues of the period, how often did you find that color was mentioned?
Actually, not a lot, although, you know, I've written a lot about the color blue and the use of different kinds of blue hues to render different kinds of water. So oceans versus rivers versus waterfalls. But they don't often, in the intertitles, call attention to it in the way this film does, you know, Last Rays of Sunset. But travelogues are such a formulaic genre. We do often get, of course, I'm sure many of the viewers know this, you know, the kind of cliche end of the film sunset shot, right? And then you might have a title that says something about the end of the day. And then you have the sun setting over a body of water is the most common form there. So that is kind of what we're getting in this St. John's Rapids film. But then the color effects there are so much more extreme than we frequently see in a travelogue.
Yeah. Just a reminder to the audience that's watching, feel free to write your comments, also ask questions. We're happy to field them as the conversation goes on and work them into the broader discussion of it all. Going back to that question of music as well, and the idea of sensation versus contemplation. How, again, another question is, we had talked briefly about what music was usually performed. You said generally there were a lot of waltzes that were performed during these travelogues. It is such a strange idea to try to think of how these films were received at the time and how music changed the perception then and changes the perception now. I'm trying to think of what waltzes would have done for these films, and in so many ways it probably would have killed it for me, but
yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the waltz. You get the sort of right? But I think they were very popular with travelogues at the time, perhaps because they were seen as a sort of upper class genre or a more educational genre, right? But then other things I found in my research is that musicians would try to play to the kind of national music that's being shown. And so, and of course, it's really difficult to research music since we don't have recordings of the music that were originally played. So, yeah, it's a challenge. But I would love to hear from you, Jose Maria, like how you were thinking about this when you were making the music. I know that you were working a lot with different, national contexts for these films and putting, the music in that way. But it's sort of a push-pull, right, between the place being shown and then the mood or the tone of the visuals, right?
Yeah, that's right. So true. Definitely one of the let's say sort of now no-brainers. I'm using a strong word there. For choosing or proposing, doing the first proposal is of course the music of the public amenities. That's it. So whenever you get the dates, you get the film, you get the context, first the production context, let's say like the filming context, and then you try to figure out first of all, okay, this could possibly being the for instance the Krakow film or the Bruges film or the New York film. Okay, this was shown amidst, for instance, let's say if these were shown in New York, so what kind of music will public amenities or what repertoires will be usual among screening halls or screening places. So the problem here is that facing this diversity of contexts will just drop you to a different discussion, which is probably, as I said before, introducing some noise into our decisions. And that's okay. Yeah, Valse was definitely an upper class thing in certain places, but for instance, in Mexico City, valses, indigenous composers were doing valses as well, and they were performing. Orquestas típicas and for instance, bands will do valses for every single kind of public amenity, from upper class halls to the streets. So this is another problem now because we're now injecting a new variable. So it seems it's all about context, not only in the production of the film, but then where it was shown, and then where are we showing it now? So, and what kind of income or input is tossed into your, melting pot where you're preparing your music. It's precisely where you take the decision. And by the end, I'm always very worried about how could possibly, for instance, my Czech friends, my Polish friends, my friends in New York, which I have many, will take or will consider this music. For instance, I'm always very afraid of doing music from, you set up a country, imagine, you choose your own, because of course the contexts are very different as well. I mean, it's not Mexican music, and there is Mexican music. I mean, there's a huge amount of diverse Mexican music. So my first referral is, I love Pordenone, for instance, because I can talk to people from the country, and then you toss them the idea, I mean, in front of a coffee or in front of a Aperol Spritz, of course. And and what we usually do is, okay, what do you think when you get this tune? I don't know it. Oh, okay, great. So I'm in a safe place. And thereafter, okay, so what do you listen to this? Does that resemble you? I once spoke to an Argentinian colleague, for instance. I was playing for an Argentinian film, and it was an indigenous music film. So it was like certain place in Argentina with certain music. And I tossed the idea to like a young colleague, and she said, I think there's not a common sense of the music of that precise place. So that's the kind of complexity that involves silent film music today, because we're getting too much input, and every single decision is political as well. So you should be like very, very aware of it. And that's a good point, Jennifer, because it's the diversity of context is also, it's probably not a problem of, let's say, musicians that were like barely playing for silence in the 60s, 70s precisely, and 80s, but thereafter, because there's a diverse way, intersectional way of doing this. So what's your decision? Oof, I think the best decision is the one you have in your body, as a musician, that it's in your body, and that connects to what you feel it's connecting with the audience. That's why, not being together in a hall now, like drinking our second coffee, and that's exactly what I'm missing, because it's always about connecting with people. It works if it works with people. I wasn't listening to your laughs, to you laughing or chit chatting, and that was, quite stressing because it's always something you have as the final input. It's working because people it's seeing or relaxing. You feel the audience, and that's crucial in a travelogue, for instance. I usually listen, for instance, something Johnny, somewhere so then I should move my music because I'm probably not getting the point. So audience is also a very important part that I was missing too much this time.
I'd love to go, you talked about politics, and that leads me very smoothly into something I'd like us to discuss. One, for example, your choice of the Saint-Saëns for the Cairo film, rather than searching for something that was, let's say, native Egyptian, you chose a French composer who's writing with an Orientalist theme, because this is an Orientalist film. I think that's really important to mention. And then, of course, the Trieste film is the most heavy one, shall we say. We've been asked, somebody's just asked if it was a home movie, and no, it's not a home movie. What we think it is we think it was made as a kind of tourist film for people to come to Trieste to to enjoy the sights and the beach and all of that. There's a similar film made at the same time also of Grado, which is a town also nearby Trieste. So it could have been something that was sponsored perhaps by the province of Friuli at the time, and then would have been probably disseminated throughout Italy. Just as many of these films, where somebody also has just asked whether they were shown in the countries of origin. Yes, they probably would have been in conjunction, and this is something that Jennifer could speak up about even more, in conjunction with all sorts of films from newsreels to places near and far. But let's go back to the politics of it, and perhaps let's talk a bit about the Trieste film. Jennifer, I don't know what
Yeah, well, I mean, it's lovely to watch the film, and we see these tourists playing in the water, and we can admire their bathing costumes and all of this, and look at how much fun they're having. And then suddenly they're at the pool and they're diving in, and we see Mussolini, and then we see the swastika, and it's sort of like this moment of like, wow, this is, of course, I was already thinking that before we saw it, but here is a very material reminder of the political realities of Italy at this time. And it's important that that reminder be there. So I appreciate that you programmed it in. And I think we have to always remember to, when we watch these old films now, I don't think there's anything wrong with enjoying a kind of nostalgia for these films, but at the same time, be cautious of that nostalgia and be aware of the ways in which travelogues kind of smooth over the conflicts that were just brewing right there off screen, right? And in this case, the political conflicts of the fascism of the time, right?
Yes. We're in a...
My fault. Sorry about that. My fault. I've seen that film many times, and watching it this time with the music, there's a scene towards the very end with the blonde woman with the big sunglasses who turns to the camera. And before, every time I've seen it when it was silent, there was something quite playful about it, which was enjoyable for me. But the way that you had shifted the music at that, or just before, and then continued with a much darker tone, it became sinister in a way. It became, maybe sinister is too strong a word, but it became something that was unsettling, it was much more mysterious and much more, it created a sense of unease, which was, I think, wonderful for us to have that sensation at that moment.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks so much. I'm so pleased to know. I mean, you, as I said, I mean, these are the Pordenone moments when researcher, curator, and musician just meet at the same point, precisely because this was the most thrilling film for me, of course, in the program. I mean, you should know it was thrilling to score because basically. What kind of music? Everything began when I, of course, got into this scene where you get that Mussolini at the back, and then your psyche just, oh no, I was enjoying this so much. Oh, I'm still enjoying this so much. What's going on? No, so there's your body, saving yourself. Okay, this is the feeling I have to get into the film. This is exactly what I have to picture. And I should say I scored this. I mean, I did some more tweaking to this score after I spoke to Jay about this, because I proposed this to be not the final film, because I told Jay, I'm not doing this climatic. I want this to be the most anticlimactic moment of the screening. So. I mean, Jay obviously agreed and just connected this gracefully with the idea, and I rescored it to be even more dark. I mean, darker, and to feature indeed that same moment we're watching, and to end up with the Bella Ciao quote, because it was so unpleasant. I mean, not ending this film with the Bella Ciao was not acceptable for me. Sorry, well, the point is that I was doing research about how this fascism treated or mistreated, I mean, better being said that way, mistreated musicians on music influences from abroad. And it was so clear to me, I needed to use American music, which was prohibited in during fascism near the 40s, like around these years. I mean, there was a very important touring. I believe it was Satchmo's last tour in Italy, like around the late 30s or such. So it seems it was still like the music of the youth, you know, at the 30s American music. And thereafter came the imposition of Italian style music. That's exactly what I was quoting. I was quoting part of a very famous song during the 30s. And thereafter, it turns into this very joyful scene, youthful in the sense that's what we're calling the late jazz music in Italy from the 30s. There's also a quote there. It's not the music itself, it's not the piece, it's not the song, but it's a quote of María, which is an Italian song that was pretty famous in the 40s, especially. And thereafter, we cut down into contemporary music, contemporary by the time, the music from the 30s and 40s, Castelnuovo Tedesco music from the 50s. There's something rotten. That's what I tried to depict in the music. But it was so nice that the Jay was really connecting with this idea. And that's exactly what exposed in Jenny for a thesis. So, you know, this is one of those magical moments where we get together by the end of the film, of the reading, our reading started.
And you're continuing the great tradition of musicians kind of playing against the grain of the film, which is something that I think silent era musicians probably did more often than we are able to even know anymore. But we do know from research that there were a number of musicians who would sort of play against the grain of films and, you know, encourage the audience to laugh at the film or receive the film in a way that was different than it was intended. I think one other point to make about the Trieste film is the fact that it's 1939. It just even formally feels somewhat different than the earlier films. I think maybe because the frame rate is, you know, probably 24 frames per second with sync sound, as opposed to the silent era ones, which might have been 16 frames per second or a variable frame rate. So it almost felt to me, hearing your music, Jose Maria, that it was like a film noir almost when you put in that sort of dark tone. You know, we're in a slightly different period in film history, and there's this kind of ominous quality coming in that's very different from the, say, ominous qualities we might see in a film from 1911 or 1920. So, you know, I guess it's the World War I context versus the World War II context of these two different moments.
Jennifer, I wonder just to further the answer that was asked about how these films might have been shown. If you could just talk a little bit about the mix of how these films were shown.
Yeah, so these films, travelogues, were usually shown as part of a variety film program, especially in the 1910s. They would have been shown as one film of many in a variety program featuring maybe a travelogue, a news film, a couple of comedies. And then even when we move into the feature film era, starting around the late 1910s and through the 1920s, you would often have a scenic film like this shown at the beginning of a program, maybe one or two short nonfiction or educational films before the main feature. So you wouldn't see a program of complete travelogues like we just watched it. You wouldn't see that in the original context. They would always have been shown in a mix of different genres of films. And the thing I've always been curious about is when the travelogue genre was kind of at its peak, the period I write about in my book in the early 1910s, they were often, at least in the United States, released as part of 1,000-foot split reels with a comedy. And so I'm very fascinated by this kind of genre pairing of a comedy and a travelogue on a single split reel, which was quite common, say, from around 1907 to 1915, when the split reel was kind of dominating in the United States. So I think it's interesting to think about the way these films might produce a kind of contemplative spectator, but then in the next moment, we might be watching a comedy and laughing, right? So there's this kind of disjunctive experience of the original exhibition context of these films that's really kind of wonderful.
No, absolutely. I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing that we're getting towards the end. Jennifer, I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about what you're working on currently.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm writing a second book now, which is about representations of nature in American film history from the silent period up through the 1950s. And I'm trying to bring into my interest in cinematic landscapes a new focus on film and the environment and basically ecology. And I'm trying to look at different ways in which cinema has this sort of natural affinity for nature. A lot of theorists have talked about that from the beginning of film. But the ways in which cinema was able to capture the environment, sometimes in the background of a fiction film, or as the very subject matter of the film in educational genres like travelogues or science films, things like that. So I have a set of case studies. I'm working on The Covered Wagon, the 1923 James Cruise Western. Let's see, there's a few other features I'll be writing about. Man Trap, a lot of films shot on location. Yeah, and I believe you showed Man Trap at Pordenona a few years ago.
We did, and we showed The Covered Wagon as well, so great.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, any film from the late silent period with big landscapes, that's kind of what I'm interested in right now. But then I carry it up through the 30s and 40s to think about how this shifts. And how we start to get a sense of nature as endangered starts to come in, not in a big way, of course, but I'm looking for sort of the prehistory of an ecological sensibility in film. So, but that book, I'm just starting it now, so it'll be a couple of years before it's published. But I've published a few essays here and there.
Great, wonderful. We'll look forward to that. Thank you both very much, so much for being with us, for joining us, for having such a great conversation. And once again, let's just add one more question. How the framing effect in the London film was realized? Was it made in camera or in printing? Surely it must have been made in printing, I would think. Mm-hmm. No, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so, probably.
Yeah.
I love all
that's fun for me because clearly they're trying to imitate the Impressionist paintings, even some of the shots that they use. By the way, something that I should have said earlier is there is a possibility that the same cameraman who made that film, the London film, also made the New York film in 1911. Julius Janssen, one of the great one of the great cameramen of all time, really, who worked so much with Victor Sjöström. It's not clear, he's not generally credited with it, but in discussions with Magnus Rosborn from the Swedish Film Institute, the cameraman was in New York around that time, apparently came over on the Lusitania, and I tried looking at the ship manifest, but I couldn't find them, but spelling is always really bad on ship manifest, so you're never quite sure. So I think that's an interesting possibility, the idea of sort of opening and closing with Janssen in very, very different ways. But yeah, so that would have been in printing rather than in camera.
That's a fantastic discovery about the cameraman. Wonderful.
It wasn't mine. I looked into it and saw that occasionally he was credited with it, and then he wasn't, and it doesn't really show up in most of his filmography. So I asked Magnus Rosborn if he had any further information, and he said it's possible. We don't know for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you just want to final thought, Jay, is like our animation at the beginning. That's like you connected that to the op film, which was like a really nice connection. But I was also thinking it was this birth of delivery services, which is in my mind daily. So I want to be fed just that way. and
Yeah,
enjoy that beauty.
I think we all want to have a flying house at the moment.
With shoes underneath it.
Yes, definitely. It's wonderful. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and hope we see each other in person as well as online soon.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Great.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Thanks so much.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye-bye. Big hugs.
Thank you, everybody, and come back in about an hour and a half for Penrod and Sam. See you then. Bye.
Bye.